This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Protesters in Sudan reject military's assurances and continue sit-in outside army headquarters in Khartoum. UN says 8,000 have fled ongoing fighting in Libya. And thousands continue protesting in Algeria for an 8th successive Friday. Hello and welcome to Africa Live, only on CGTN. I'm Karen Roberts, live in Nairobi. Ucha joins you now with all your business headlines.
Thank you, Karen. And here's a look at what's coming up on Africa Live Biz. The CEO of oil firm Canal Cobil resigns amid an insider trading investigation. And Saudi Aramco's bonds fall in trading despite record investor demand. Of course, all that coming up within the program. For now, it's back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Ucha. We begin in Sudan, where protesters have continued with demonstrations despite assurances by the military that it did not have ambitions to hold on to power. Defying a curfew, thousands have continued to sit-in outside army headquarters in Khartoum. Protests have also been reported in other towns as well. The protesters insist that they will not accept anyone from the old regime to be part of the transitional council. Well, earlier, the head of Sudan's Provisional Military Political Council said the army, as we said earlier, had no intentions of holding on to power. A military spokesperson said the military's only concern was public order and security. CGTN's Susan Mwangeli reports.
Sudan's military maintains its only concern is public order.
God willing, the government will be civilian. It will be a civilian government, which political groups will decide on, and we will not involve ourselves in the process. They'll sit together at a table and then hand us a list and say, this is our new government.
The military is reaching out to protesters who have expressed doubt about the army's intentions.
We did not come here with solutions. The solutions will come from the protesters. Give us the solutions and your political, economic and social prospects. Our loyalties do not lie with any one ideology or group.
It further says it will not extradite President Omar al-Bashir on war crime charges. The assurances by the military has, however, done little to appease the protesters who are demanding for a swift return to civilian rule.
We will not sit down for dialogue. Our dialogue is one phrase: the fall of the regime. And it will not fall once, but in different times. And if Bashir's party continues lying and cheating the protesters, the fall will continue.
The Sudan Professional Association has called on protesters to continue their demonstrations until their demands are met. Susan Mwangeli, CGTN.
Well, the UN has called on the Sudanese military to refrain from any use of force and to ensure the rights of protesters are protected. It's further called on authorities to release all political detainees and to fully cooperate with the International Criminal Court for full accountability.
I wouldn't want to get into details on who our sources are, but there are clear indications from them that they are not happy with what happened yesterday and that the protests will continue, which again is why we are calling on the authorities to address the people's demands. We also understand that the announcement that was made yesterday didn't indicate any possibility for people to participate in this transition, which is why we are again calling on the authorities to ensure that there's a concerted effort with the meaningful participation of civil society, of dissenting voices in charting a way forward.
Meanwhile, China says that it's paying close attention to the situation in Sudan and will continue to develop cooperative relations with the nation. Chinese Foreign Affairs spokesperson Lu Kang says China respects Sudan's sovereignty and will uphold its foreign policy of non-interference.
China pays close attention to the situation in Sudan. As is known to all, we always follow the principle of non-interference in other countries' internal affairs. We believe that Sudan has the ability to deal with its internal affairs. We hope and believe that the Sudanese side is capable of safeguarding the national peace and stability. China and Sudan have traditional friendly relations, and the traditional friendship between the two peoples is also strong. No matter how the Sudanese situation develops, we will remain committed to maintaining and developing the friendly and cooperative relations between the two countries.
Meanwhile, the United States has suspended discussions with Sudan on normalizing relations. The lifting of a 20-year-old trade embargo against Khartoum by the Obama administration paved the way for the so-called Phase 2 talks between the two countries. The US recognized Sudan's assistance in fighting ISIL, as well as improving their human rights record. Sanctions were initially imposed on Sudan in 1997 and increased in 2006, following violence in the country's Darfur region. The US is calling for a peaceful and democratic Sudan that deserves a transition in less than 2 years, the 2 years announced by Ibn Auf.
As events unfold, the United States continues to call on transitional authorities to exercise restraint and to allow space for civilian participation within the government. We commend the people of Sudan for their resiliency and their commitment to nonviolence as they express their legitimate demand for inclusive and representative government that respects and protects human rights.
Well, John Gatchie now joins us in the studio. John's a veteran journalist and security expert on South Sudan and Sudan issues. Thank you very much for joining us. What's your reading of these developments in Sudan?
Thank you, Karen. My reading is that we are still having what I would call a meeting of minds within the security apparatus in Sudan. And when I'm saying about the security apparatus, I'm talking about the military and the national security intelligence, and also the other militia forces that Bashir had put together. I think there is an issue of trying to find out who is who and who is calling the shot. But it's quite evident it's a military now. Will they be able to co-opt the other forces together? Perhaps. But as we could see, indications are that some of the forces that were very closely aligned to Bashir have indicated they will not be willing to join in the military council. That, for me, raises certain issues as to whether the military or security apparatus is cohesive at the moment. But let's nobody be in doubt. It is the military that is calling the shot.
So still military, but yeah, you're unsure that it is cohesive.
Precisely.
So, well, as the military said earlier, they spoke at length about their reason for the takeover and the promise, and they have promised a civilian government. But do you think this announcement is likely to appease the demonstrators? They're still out in force, aren't they?
Certainly not. As for the Sudanese protesters, and specifically the younger generation, and what you're calling the professional association and their allied people, this is a palace coup. This is not what they were looking for. It is a military, perhaps cutting their losses, so to speak, and throwing Bashir under the bus, but also keeping control. They are trying to hold on to it because they would like to be in charge of what, because they are extremely worried if they were to lose control, what would happen. So it's really, it's a palace coup, and it's really a continuation of the military's hold on the Sudanese political scene. So it's not changed.
And they're talking about 2 years. Can they hold on for that length of time?
Perhaps everybody would hope that they would. That is within the security apparatus. But it is quite evident the political association, the civil society, and even the larger Sudanese community indeed want a change, and they want a new breed of change, political change, not one that is being guided along so with the military being in control. I think tomorrow it is indicated they've called for a general strike tomorrow, and indeed they're saying it would be one of the biggest gatherings so far. Hopefully we will see what happens to that.
And of course there has been a night-time curfew, but this has already been defied by the protesters. What do you think is likely to happen next?
Karen, that is a big question. Will the military pull off the gloves and contain this? I doubt that they would want to do it right now, but I think they would play along. So this would be a cat and mouse game until they are sure everything is in control, and then they will come in very hard on the demonstrators. That is my fear, and possibly that might then break this cohesive military infrastructure, and you could find some possibly within the lower ranks perhaps joining the demonstration. Again, it's an open question. Will the demonstrators concede? I doubt that. I think we might be seeing something akin to what is happening in Algeria. Now, the question is the military in Sudan as cohesive or as focused or in control as the one in Algeria? That is a question.
Okay, yeah. Well, this is quite a fast-moving story. Thank you very much for your analysis. So that was John Getche, veteran journalist and security expert on South Sudan and Sudan issues. Thank you so much for coming in. Well, the African Union has threatened to revoke Sudan's membership following the recent development in the country. The AU says that it will consider economic sanctions against Khartoum. CGTN's Giram Chala now reports.
It looks like President Omar Hassan al-Bashir is gone, never to return to power. But the way it was done, the military takeover, has made AU unhappy. The African Union has condemned the coup and wants constitutional order back on.
The African Union would further appeal probably to all stakeholders right now on the ground that more now than ever is time to engage in an inclusive dialogue, to create the conditions that would make it possible to meet the aspirations of the Sudanese people for democracy and good governance, and restore constitutional order as soon as possible.
But Sudan will now also face suspension, sanction, and the military behind the takeover could be taken to the competent court of the Union. The Peace and Security Council is expected to make one or more of these decisions soon.
In terms of the next sequence for the African Union Commission is for the organ on elections, peace and democracy, which is the African Union Peace and Security Council, that would need to meet and then discuss the issue and take the appropriate decisions based on existing instruments like the Lomé 2000 Declaration and the African Charter on Elections, Democracy and Governance.
Sudanese protesters are still on the streets of Khartoum even after the removal and arrest of President Bashir was announced. They want a civilian leadership, not the military. Things are far from over in Sudan. Grumtara CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
Meanwhile, the ouster of Bashir has raised concerns about whether neighbouring South Sudan will be negatively impacted. South Sudan is struggling to regain stability after 5 years of civil war. Bashir has been heavily involved in the success of the South Sudan peace process.
On the streets of South Sudan's capital, Juba, celebrations welcome Bashir's removal.
I'm very happy, because in 30 years, there are children who've been born since the time former President Omar al-Bashir took power. Hunger in this country is because of al-Bashir's problem and the government of South Sudan. They closed the whole border and nothing comes through. But now we can breathe a little.
While they celebrate, there is much uncertainty about what comes next. The ousted Sudan leader helped broker the South Sudan peace deal last year.
The stability in South Sudan, the peace process in South Sudan affects also the North, economically, security-wise. So I think they will focus to see that nothing is disturbed. We are sure the new system in Khartoum will try to see that more relations than before will be built. So we only appeal to the new system to ensure that the country becomes stable as soon as possible.
Time has come for new political actors in the Sudan who must be interested to see into that South Sudan is stable.
Bashir had for decades waged fighting with southern Sudan, which ultimately separated from the north in 2011 and became South Sudan. Chamhono, CGTN.
We are going to a short break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including thousands continue protesting in Algiers for an 8th successive Friday.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca. Among the crowds in Cairo.
Who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile. Along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
I'm Ucheoko reporting from Nairobi's city center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's get you the latest from Libya now, where a warplane belonging to Eastern forces has attacked a government military camp. According to a local source, the attack happened in the western town of Zawara. It's not known if there were any casualties. The airstrike is the closest to an oil and gas facility since the Eastern forces launched an offensive on Tripoli. Meanwhile, gun battles continued on Friday as the two sides defended their positions on the outskirts of the city. The United Nations says more than 8,000 people have fled fighting around Libya's capital, half of whom have been displaced over the last 2 days. And as Tripoli residents flee the fighting, Tunisia's southern city of Ben Guedan is their first destination. Here's CGTN's Adnan Chouachi on the reception of Libyans in the city.
The escalation of the armed conflict in Libya has caused an unusual activity on the border with Tunisia. Libyans describe the situation as alarming near Tripoli.
We stopped working and fled with our families because the situation is very dangerous. The center of Tripoli is still stable, but clashes erupted in its surroundings.
Tunisian authorities have reinforced control in Ras Ejdir border crossing. Hundreds of National Guards, soldiers and customs agents were deployed.
Border search for cars takes hours. We left our car on the Libyan side of the border because hundreds of families were stranded. We walked for 3 miles to enter Tunisia.
Libyans expressed dismay at the situation in their country. Many believe Libya could plunge again into civil war if a political agreement is not reached between rival groups.
We hope that stakeholders will agree on a political settlement. Otherwise, we will stay in Tunisia because the worst is yet to come in Libya.
In 2011, Tunisia struggled to cope with over 1 million refugees who fled the violence in Libya, including tens of thousands of foreign workers who streamed across the Tunisian border. Tunisian President Beji Caid Sibsi has called for the need to avoid military escalation in Libya and to stop the fighting in Tripoli. The head of state further highlighted the importance of supporting the political process and showing restraint so as to prevent further suffering of the Libyan people. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Thousands of Algerians have continued protesting for the 8th consecutive Friday. They're demanding that the ruling elite steps down ahead of elections set for July. Most of the Algerians have been expressing their dissatisfaction at the appointment of a caretaker president, Abdelkader Ben Salah. Some have also been calling for the prosecution of former and current officials suspected to have been involved in corruption.
We came out today to say that Ben Salah's position is unconstitutional. The constitution needs to be protected by implementing Articles 7 and 8 that say that the people have the authority, not the military, which brings in one of their own. We do not deserve military rule. We deserve a democratic and free Algeria.
Let's now head to Kenya, where authorities are pursuing militants who kidnapped 2 Cuban doctors early on Friday. According to the police spokesperson, the suspects headed towards Kenya-Somali border with their victims. The incident happened in the northern county of Mandera early in the morning. The attackers also killed a police officer who was acting as the doctor's security. No group has claimed responsibility. However, authorities are pointing an accusing finger at the Somali-based Al-Shabaab group. The group has been staging frequent attacks within the borders of Kenya and Somalia.
So far, the county government vehicle, which belongs to hospital, has been recovered, and the driver is being held with us for interrogation, for purposes of interrogation. All security agencies of the state have been mobilized to pursue the criminals and rescue the victims.
Moving to South Africa now, where days of riots have disrupted normal business in the communities in the Somerset West region of Cape Town. Mobs ransacked shops and supermarkets in the area, including 3 Chinese stores. The riot police fired rubber bullets to try to disperse the rioters and to control the situation. Reports link the riots to tension related to land occupation in the area. The riots, which have been continuing for days now, have disrupted residents' access to hospitals and schools.
We have rescued the trapped Chinese businessmen with the police and their riot vehicle. In the beginning, several friends came to contact the on-duty police, but the police did not know where the trapped Chinese businessmen were, and they had to communicate with the trapped Chinese people to pick them up quickly.
We are just unhappy because if they are striking that side, they have their own purpose of striking that side, of they're striking for houses. By they're not coming here, our people can't go to work, our children can't go to schools. We are terrified, we are fed up of these people.
In Zimbabwe, communal farmers' efforts to bounce back from the devastating thalassemiosis outbreak have received a boost. This follows plans to revive dip tanks in 3 affected districts. The farmers are also receiving training in alternative ways of getting rid of ticks and other pests. Over 5,000 heads of cattle were wiped out in the 2018 thalassemiosis outbreak. Here's CGTN's Farouk Makatuya with more.
A year ago, farmers here were in a panic. Cattle were dying in large numbers. One farmer I met had lost his entire herd of 38 beasts. More than 5,000 died in this district due to thalassemiosis, or January disease. Inadequate chemicals due to foreign currency shortages had seen farmers stop dipping their animals. Now, disused dip tanks are being brought back to life.
We put a program together where farmers were being trained. We were also providing some chemicals for the animals to be sprayed or to be dipped. And in the hope that with the training and the dip that they had received, they would then be able to pay for the dipping services and thus start the dipping program.
The training has dispelled some myths.
Some farmers believed that their cattle get contaminated by other cattle at the cattle dip, but we learned that the dipping is what the sick animals need.
It's not just a new lease of life that's been given to this dip tank, it's also an opportunity for this community to protect its livestock and to generate even more from that source of pride and wealth.
A cattle grading app developed to ensure farmers fetch the best prices will soon be launched.
An example where we've started in Zambia is that the farmers then learned that the animals that they are holding onto, which are nice and big, and over 6 years, actually are going into commercial. So their question was, if we then bring our animals to you when they're just over 2 years old and we fatten them, do we get a better price? And they were told that yes.
Better returns will give farmers an added incentive to take care of their livestock, and that should lower the number of deaths recorded here. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Wedza, Zimbabwe.
The University of Johannesburg has conferred an honorary doctorate degree in engineering upon Chinese President Xi Jinping. The university described President Xi as a visionary statesperson. The Chinese ambassador to South Africa, Lin Songtian, accepted the degree as the representative of President Xi Jinping. CGTN's Yolisa Njumela has more.
We are proud to award President Xi Jinping the degree Doctor Engineering Honoris Causa.
The University of Johannesburg is the first South African university to grant the honor to a Chinese leader. University officials praised Chinese President Xi Jinping for his contributions in engineering and for what they call his world vision.
One of the mechanisms that China actually uses in order to move forward is that it uses engineering thinking. Most of China's leaders are actually engineers. And I think that is a model that we as South Africa should look very closely to, especially as we modernize our economy. So this honor, not only is it an honor for the President of China, but it is also an honor for the Chinese people. We are saying that the contributions of China to the world, certainly to the world economy, is absolutely well appreciated, certainly by us here at the University of Johannesburg.
The award was accepted by the Chinese ambassador to South Africa, Lin Songtian. He says, under the stewardship of the Chinese leader, China continues to prosper.
When President Xi Jinping assumed the office 6 years ago, China was facing a very serious challenges such as air pollutions, corruptions caused by the rapid economic growth in our past more than 30 years in China. He led China, the Chinese people, to successfully exploit a new path and successful path and bring in the hope and future of China and the world.
China is not only South Africa's largest trading partner, but it has also emerged in recent years as a significant investor in both infrastructure and industrial projects in South Africa.
Throughout his presidency, President Xi Jinping has always made it a priority for him and other top Chinese state officials to visit the African continent and further enhance the already existing relations. President Xi Jinping has already been to South Africa 3 times for state visits.
The University of Johannesburg is the largest university in Johannesburg and the 4th largest university in South Africa. Yolisa Njumela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now go to Ucha for all the latest business news. Over to you.
Thank you, Karen. And coming up on Africa Live Biz. CEO of oil marketing firm Canal Cobil resigns amid an insider trading investigation. And Saudi Aramco's bonds fall in trading despite record investor demand.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's start off with some corporate news. CEO of oil marketing firm Canal Cobil, David Ohana, has resigned from the company. Now, the Pan-African company has been the subject of an insider trading probe and is also undergoing a takeover by French firm Rubis Energy. Now, the Paris-based Rubis agreed to buy Canal Cobil in a deal that valued the retailer with operations in 6 African markets at around $353 million. The French multinational received regulatory approval in March to acquire the remaining shares in the company that it doesn't already own. Well, last month, Kenyan regulator, the Capital Markets Authority, recovered about $4.5 million from Canal Cobil after reports of insider trading led to an investigation. Meanwhile, the bonds issued by Saudi Aramco in this week's unprecedented offering sank for a second day, even though its debut in the international capital markets drew a record-breaking demand. Now, the order book for the oil giant's bond sale climbed as high as $100 billion US, smashing previous highs for emerging market borrowers. Now, the demand from fund managers also neared records seen in developed market debt deals. Its declines come as oil prices in New York fell from a 5-month high. The oil producer, which recently revealed itself as the world's most profitable company, self-consciously positioned itself against major U.S. corporations. And the International Monetary Fund is calling on Nigeria to cut tax exemptions as well as incentives. The recommendation was made by the Assistant Director of the IMF's Fiscal Affairs Department, Catherine Patillo, at the IMF spring meetings in Washington. Now, she also advised that Nigeria's excise taxes should be raised and expanded. Patillo added that Nigeria's non-oil revenue to GDP is currently at about 3.4%, which is one of the lowest in the world. Now, IMF had previously asked that the Nigerian government increase VAT, which of course is one of the ways the Federal Inland Revenue Service plans to finance the new minimum wage in the country. And moving on now, Kenya Airways says it will be profitable within 4 years if the government approves its proposal to replace the Kenyan Airports Authority as the operator of the East African nation's aviation hub. Now, the airline's officials were in Kenya's parliament on Tuesday to discuss their proposal to create a unit to the country's main airports, JKIA, under a 3-decade concession. The current operator, Kenya Airports Authority, is set to receive annual fees under the deal. The proposed venture is aimed at achieving profitability and, in the long run, ability to generate profit before tax, as well as dividends for KQ's shareholders. Now, with trade turmoil and growing restrictions on carbon emissions making for a tumultuous future, some of the world's biggest automakers are now pivoting to a new market, and that's Africa. However, the challenge that remains ahead is the growing number of imported used cars that, of course, continue to dominate the continent's auto industry. Here's CGTN's Laura Walubengo explaining.
At the edge of this forest in the Kenyan capital, thousands of used cars glitter in the hot sun, waiting for buyers. Imported from Japan and the Middle East, these second-hand cars continue to dominate Kenya's auto industry. They have become an obstacle for big car makers who are hoping to crack the increasingly growing African market. Global car makers like Volkswagen, BMW, Toyota in 2015 formed the Association of African Automotive Manufacturers to lobby governments to limit the imports of used cars.
For now, maybe that 1 million will cater for the vehicle which you wanted. Maybe a 2000cc vehicle you'll get with that 1 million. With the implementation of that policy, it means that with that 1 million you won't be able to get that 2000cc car. So you'll be forced to go to a lower capacity vehicle, which means that you won't get the vehicle which you want. So basically, I think on my side, I think that the implementation of that policy won't be good for the consumer.
Africa's current population and household income is growing rapidly. However, its 1 billion inhabitants only account for 1% of the world's new passenger car sales.
It is very easy for us to produce cars in one of our global plants, import them into the various markets in Africa. But if we really want to create a sustainable industry, I think it's important we start looking and making the first steps towards some form of industrialization.
We started scanning the markets, and we looked into ways of opening them up, because they're literally not functioning right now due to importation of used vehicles all the way from Japan or the US. It's a dumping ground for used cars.
Used cars are among the leading imports in many African countries, and a pivot to this drift could help insulate automakers from the immediate effects of the electric vehicle revolution. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
Well, let's head to Uganda now, where China's footprint is improving the livelihoods of thousands of people. So far, Chinese investors have developed several parks and are currently developing more, with the aim of creating some 40,000 jobs in the country. Well, our reporter Daniel Arap Moi is in Uganda and brings us more on that story.
Just like many other African countries, Uganda is looking at the Chinese industrialization model to pull millions of its people out of poverty.
In the last 5 years or so, they've created about close to over 56,000 jobs in their private parks and in the companies that we have licensed.
In the country's Mukono district east of the capital Kampala, hundreds of youths are reaping from the benefits of newly set up Chinese-owned industrial parks.
Like I now practically I can weld, I can do some mechanical work, which I did not know.
Most of people are getting now a living from them, so I'm happy with what they have done for us in Uganda.
The Mukono-based Chinese industrial park, which deals in mattresses, plywood and steel manufacturing, employs over 1,500 local youths. Tiantiang Group is one such Chinese investment that is changing lives of hundreds of young men and women in Uganda.
I managed to buy a plot in my village. And my kids now, they are at school.
The industrial sector development is a key priority of the Ugandan government and occupies a central position in the government's social and economic development plan. Chinese manufacturers have now taken advantage of this key development agenda, which is expected to culminate into Made in Uganda by China industrialization approach.
On average, we license about 60 Chinese companies per year, on average, for the last 5 years. And cumulatively, since Chinese have been investing, which has been from about, vigorously from about 2008, Chinese investments are valued up to over $1 billion US.
China has also contributed significantly to Uganda's infrastructural development, particularly in the areas of transport, energy and ICT.
Move around Uganda and look at the major infrastructure developments and look at and see the impact that we have had with China, not only in the infrastructure developments but also in the private businesses.
Officials say more jobs are expected to be created with time as Chinese factories increase production capacity for both local consumption and export.
We are seeing also a lot of investment in social projects like hospitals. When it comes to private sector, as Uganda Investment Authority, that's where our interest is. There's a lot of investment from China.
According to the Uganda Investment Authority, Uganda is among the top 4 investment destinations for China in sub-Saharan Africa. In 2017 alone, foreign direct investment from China to Uganda amounted to approximately $219 million. Uganda officials say there is a lot that Africa can learn from the Chinese experience.
Ugandans are learning Chinese. Quite a number of Chinese are learning English. So now we are beginning to see joint venture partnerships becoming a reality.
Special economic zones is China's industrialization model that Beijing hopes to spread to other countries. Daniel Arap Moi, CGTN, Kampala, Uganda.
Well, that's all for now on Africa Live Biz. But coming up on Global Business Africa, we'll be taking a closer look at Sudan's economy as the country transitions on to a military council. Of course, all that coming up top of the hour. For now, back to you, Karen.
Thank you very much, Uche. We are going to a short break. Don't go away. Lots more to come. Including Uganda passes law recognizing people with albinism.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Moving to Uganda, the country has passed a law recognizing albinism under the category persons with disability. The move aims to allow them to compete for the 5 slots reserved for persons with disability in Parliament. Persons living with albinism lobbied for the distinction. They say without it, they have difficulty competing for parliamentary seats because of discrimination. As CGTN's Hilary Ayesaka reports.
Promoting rights of persons with albinism, Brenda Bonavana has been a subject of stigma from childhood. A single parent raised her.
My mom separated with my dad just because of my skin color. Yeah, but from that time, we went through a lot, as you know.
But with courage and determination, Brenda is gradually rising above stigma. She is now a student leader and she's upbeat about the new law.
We are very happy about it. Yes, because it is giving us a platform, we as leaders. Yes, it is giving us a platform to do the representation. Of course, if you do not have someone who represents you, your voice can never be heard.
The leader of Source of the Nile Union of Persons with Albinism, Peter Ogik, says the law is encouraging people with albinism to fully participate in politics.
Most of us, we've been fearing so much, and you find even those who had intentions to come and represent their voices at the parliament, they were fearing. But through this amendment, it's really empowering them, empowering us to come and speak out our voices and to really bring out issues that we think can better our lives and our human rights, just like anyone else.
Persons living with albinism in Uganda face challenges of stigma, kidnap, and cancer-related diseases. Some of these have been addressed in the new law.
This amendment, it gave a lot of things, including the provision of free sunscreen lotions by the state, because, you know, many people are dying of skin cancer, they couldn't afford to buy this sunscreen lotion.
Figures from SNOPA show that there are more than 4,000 persons with albinism in Uganda, but government says this number may be underreported and there could be more. And out of these, SNOPA says ritualists have attacked 1 in every 5 persons with albinism. A 2018 report by Amnesty International blames authorities in Africa for failing to protect the albino population. The amended law comes at a time when there's growing stereotype and attacks on persons living with albinism for their body parts. It's hoped that the introduction of tougher laws could put an end to this problem. Hilary Ayesaka, CGTN, Kampala.
Well, a South African model has become the first woman with albinism to grace the cover of Vogue magazine. Tando Hopper is an advocate for people living with albinism. She's featured in this month's Vogue Portugal's Africa the Motherland edition. CGTN's Julie Shear reports.
Tando Hopper has made South Africa proud. Her own unique beauty was chosen for this month's Vogue Portugal magazine.
I have been on national covers. In fact, the first Condé Nast cover I was on was Glamour magazine. But with respect to Vogue, Portugal, I mean, it's going to be shown in Milan, London, and it speaks to expansion. It means that your voice is louder, you know, so for me that means quite a lot.
Hopper, a former prosecutor and strong activist for albinism, has defied beauty norms since she took up modeling in 2012.
The whole point of representation is you're trying to rebrand and recreate the story that your body is living in, you know. You're trying to make sure that your body survives the story of oppression and discrimination. And I'm hoping that with respect to this kind of representation, the more human and more relatable the representation, the less the stigma will be.
It's not very often that we see people with albinism on the cover of fashion magazines. Right behind me, as you can see, there's nothing that's considered different or unique. But Thando Hopper has been changing that narrative. She's used her condition to show the beauty of her skin and to raise awareness around albinism.
Usually, minority groups are a casualty when it comes to that. So women with vitiligo, women with albinism, or people with albinism, period, the smaller groups, minority groups tend to disappear. So what I really am hoping that this will do is it not only gives a platform for people with albinism, but minority groups in particular, so that people begin to understand that that representation is with like a really significant value, and that basically we need a more human-centric approach in media.
She's a great example of breaking stereotype, and breaking stereotype is that inclusivity is part of it, and she is one phenomenal woman who has been chosen to represent African women, black women, people with albinism. She's opening not just to the Western world, but to a whole new European world, which is Portuguese people.
Thando was chosen as one of BBC's most influential women in the world in 2018. She hopes to continue using her voice to highlight issues affecting minority communities. Julie Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
All the sports news coming up for you after the break, including Africa awaits the draw for the 2019 Africa Cup of Nations in Egypt.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
We begin with African football, where in just a short while the draw for the 2019 African Cup of Nations will be held in Egypt. CAF has already released the POTS classification to be used in the draw, as CGTN's Adel El Mahrouhi now reports.
At the glamorous pyramids of Giza, the 2019 AFCON draw venue is getting its final touches. Friday's event is obviously built to amaze Africa's football fans.
There
are huge preparations from the Egyptian Football Association to organize an unprecedented event at the pyramids of Giza. It's a message through which Egypt wants to portray they can host World Cup events.
On the draw's eve, CAF has finally released the team's classification. Privileged by being the hosts and defending champions, Egypt and Cameroon have landed in Pot A. That has surprisingly pushed DR Congo and Ghana to Group B, despite their better FIFA ranking.
We have strong African teams up until Pot C. That could produce more than one group of death. And most probably, that would lead to having pretty easy groups, which can open room for dark horses to rise. But in any case, there will be at least 2 African heavyweights in each group.
The 24 African nations have been divided into 4 pots based on their FIFA ranking. They will be drawn into 6 4-teams groups.
The draw event will be Africa's first impression of Egypt staging and hosting of the competition.
and the country is determined to prove that it can pull off the biggest African football showpiece, despite the little time it had after the initial hosts, Cameroon, were stripped of their hosting rights. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Well, I think we can speak to Adel right now on the Africa Cup of Nations draw in Cairo. Adel, what can we expect from the draw tonight?
Well, actually, no one knows exactly what to expect. We've spoken to giants in African football and head coaches of great national teams, and everyone is quite excited. This is the first of its kind 24 teams competition, and therefore the expectations is quite numerous. But what we know for sure is that there is fierce competition. Many strong teams, have you heard in my report, and people are quite excited to see how this first of a time 24 teams African Cup of Nations will turn out. There is excitement that the football plan or the football map in Africa is quite changing. Many teams are rising as strong contenders. Egypt may be a little bit privileged because it is the host, but what we've known and seen as great champions in the past years might be different this year. People are looking up to Senegal as one of the strongest teams this year, but it also will come at the end to the draws and which teams will be draw with which, and this might increase the chances of some national teams or decrease chances of very high and very highly expected teams to proceed to next rounds.
And Adel, CAF has reportedly fired its Secretary General Amir Fahmy. Do we know why?
Well, CAF has held an executive meeting on Thursday to discuss numerous issues. The media was there, however, they were pushed away by CAF team trying not to get any information of that meeting. And even after the meeting has concluded, there hasn't been any official announcement up till this moment. But many people who attended the meeting they don't want their names to be disclosed because it is not official yet, but they have confirmed that Amr Fahmy, the Egyptian Secretary General, has been sacked. The reasons of which remain quite anonymous. Some say there is a sort of conflict between him and the CAF President Ahmed Ahmed. But all of these, till this point, will be just speculations until CAF officially and formally announces the resignation and the appointment of what is expected to be the Moroccan side.
And Adel, CAF has also stripped Ethiopia of the hosting rights for the 2020 Africa Nations Championship. Have any reasons been given for this?
Well, again, officially, at least on the CAF website, we are still waiting for further details. However, from Ethiopia itself, there has been sort of a confession within even the Ethiopian Football Federation, who has confessed that by next year, and the CHAN 2020 is scheduled, Ethiopia will be going through parliamentary elections around the same time of the competition. They were keen to host it, but they believe that there might be logistical challenges for them to host the competition. At least these have been the announcement from the Ethiopian side, but we're waiting also to know and take a more in-depth review from CAF and hear more information in that file.
Okay, Adel, thank you very much for that. That was CGTN's Adel El Mahroui on the Africa Cup of Nations in Cairo. Moving on to other sports news now, to volleyball. Egyptian club Al Ahly claimed their 14th African Volleyball Club Championship title following a 3-0 victory over Smuha in the final of the Men's Championship in Cairo. Ahly dominated the game from the start, winning the 3 sets 25-17, 25-23 and 25-19. This was the first time that the two sides met at the final of the African Volleyball Club Championships. Al Ahly's Ahmed Saleh set a record by winning his 7th title following his success with Al Ahly.
It's the 14th title in this competition, and we have 6 African Cup titles. We now have 20 African titles. I believe we are the only club in the world with this many continental trophies. Smuha was a decent team, and I think it has a good future. They've already beaten Zamalek 4 times in their last encounters. We've won 3-0, but it doesn't make them an easy opponent.
Playing among Al Ahly fans had its fearful impact on the players. We strayed to reach the final, vowed to do our best. Yet there is a huge gap in the experience. That definitely was why we lost. We are taking gradual steps and hopefully next year we will be better.
Investigations are underway over allegations that 3 Chelsea fans have racially abused Liverpool forward Mohamed Salah. The 3 were denied access into the Sanogo Stadium during the Thursday night Europa League match.